Welcome to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing, founder of the Reiki Business Collective and creator of the Build Your Reiki Business program, sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Greetings, welcome, and thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. It's Christian of Standing Stones Healing. As always, thankful to have you here, so thank you so very much. In this week's episode, we're talking about market saturation. Is the Reiki market saturated? But first, I want to make sure to invite you to this November's Reiki Business Summit. If you have not heard, this is an exciting live 4-day online event all about Reiki business. You will not want to miss it because it is 4 days of live presentations from Reiki leaders like Mary Raposo, Andrea Kennedy, Colleen Benelli, Karen Cagg, Pam Allen LeBlanc, and Michaela Daystar, and me too. Plus, lots of opportunities for live discussions with other attendees and networking. You will not want to miss it to move your Reiki business forward. Learn more and save your seat now at standingstoneshealing.com/summit. Yes, the link is down below. So, is the Reiki market saturated? You know, this is something that I have been seeing come up lately in comments on Facebook posts, in discussions in my Reiki business building sessions, in workshops, and in other places where Reiki practitioners are saying things like, Reiki is a saturated market, or how do I market in a saturated industry like Reiki? And so I wanted to do a podcast episode on whether or not this is true. Is Reiki a saturated market? The short answer is no. But we're going to talk a little bit about why it might seem to some practitioners like Reiki is. First of all, Reiki is not a saturated market because so many people don't know what Reiki is. Now, when we talk about markets, I want to back up a second here and say that a market is, it takes into consideration multiple factors, including your location. And so Reiki may not be well known at all in one location, one geographic location, let's say central Nebraska. But Reiki may be very well known in another location like, I don't know, Sedona, Arizona. And so in central Nebraska, Reiki is not a saturated market, but in Sedona, Arizona, it just might be. Now, when we refer to a market as being saturated, what does this mean? It means that there is more opportunity for purchasing than there are purchasers. Let me say this another way. There are more opportunities to get a Reiki session than there are people who want a Reiki session. So market saturation for Reiki might look like an area where there are way more Reiki practitioners than there are people who want a Reiki session. In this kind of market, there's often a lot of competition because there aren't enough clients to go around. Businesses will often price themselves competitively, meaning they often will find themselves in a race to lower their prices and be the lowest priced option in order to attract more clients. And just generally, growth in this kind of environment is challenging. And so maybe Sedona, Arizona does not need another Reiki practitioner. Maybe there isn't enough demand for more practitioners in Sedona, but guaranteed there are more opportunities in other areas for Reiki practitioners. And so when we talk about market saturation, I believe it's important for us to really consider the context. What exact market are we talking about? And if we talk about Reiki as its own market globally, and we don't focus in and get specific, and we just say Reiki as a very general market, then no, generally speaking, Reiki is not a saturated market, because like I mentioned, there are so many people who don't know what Reiki is. When we think about market saturation within Reiki, I personally like to think about restaurants. Restaurants are everywhere, right? We have all kinds of restaurants all over the place. In a small town of maybe a few thousand people, you might have 10 restaurants. And then someone might come along and open an 11th. Now, no one ever says the market is saturated. The restaurant industry is saturated. There's no room for more restaurants in the restaurant industry, because restaurants are popping up all of the time, including an 11th restaurant in that town of only a few thousand people. Now you might think, well, Christian, restaurants are different from Reiki. People are always going to need to eat. And so, of course, people are always going to need to go to restaurants. Well, yes, indeed, people are always going to need to eat. But that doesn't mean that they want to go to restaurants. For me personally, I rarely eat at a restaurant. And when I say rarely, I really mean that. But yet I eat every day. And so no one thinks of the restaurant industry as saturated. And no one, when they have a challenge with their restaurant or making it profitable, which, by the way, it is very difficult to make a restaurant profitable. It is a challenging industry, but you don't hear people say things like, oh, the restaurant industry is just so saturated. So why do we hear this about Reiki? Because Reiki is not always easy to sell. Reiki is not always easy to market. Reiki is not always easy to talk about. I talk about it in the Talking About Reiki episode of the podcast, and I talk about how we as Reiki practitioners are selling something that people don't already know what it is. They're not already familiar with it, and so we have a lot of educating to do. What will often happen when a practitioner says that the market is saturated is that what it really means is that they're having a hard time marketing Reiki. And it's not that the market is saturated, it's that they're having a challenge with marketing Reiki. And so it's so much easier to simply say, oh, Reiki is oversaturated, than it is to say, I'm challenged to market Reiki. Because when we're challenged in our Reiki business with selling, with marketing, it can be hard for us to recognize that we're the ones with the challenge, that we're having a hard time getting the message out, getting the word out, attracting the right clients. And so often it's just so much easier to throw up our hands and say, well, the market is saturated. Well, of course I can't have a Reiki business. The market is saturated. Of course no one wants to buy Reiki from me. The market is saturated. There are all these other Reiki practitioners. They've taken all of the business. I can't get any because the market is saturated. I actually had someone say to me, the market is saturated by those of us like me who have taken all of the clients and who have found a platform where we can be profitable, and we've crowded out everyone else. Well, I will say that no, indeed, I have not. Neither has anyone else who you might think of in the Reiki industry, Reiki leaders, including those of us who are online. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of Reiki practitioners who don't know who I am. And so believe me, I am not saturating the Reiki market. And believe me, there is plenty of room for you, including, yes, indeed, with online Reiki. And so, indeed, yes, even those of us who are operating online and who do have profitable online Reiki businesses, we have not saturated the market. But what is true is that, again, it can seem like the market is saturated when we are challenged to market our Reiki business. And yes, indeed, that does include an online Reiki business as well, because an online business has its own unique set of challenges. It is different from an in-person Reiki business. It's why I have the Distance Reiki Business Builder program, a program specifically for distance building a distance Reiki business, because it is different. But with way more people who don't know what Reiki is than who do know what Reiki is, the market is for sure not saturated. And so the first thing that I want to encourage us to do is to recognize that our world is not the world. And so our view of what's happening in the market is not the whole view of the market. So often, we as human beings will extrapolate and we'll look at what's right in front of us and we'll say, that's the whole thing. You know, there's this great story about people who close their eyes and then touch an elephant and they try to guess what it is. And someone touches the leg and says, this is a tree. And, because it feels like a trunk, a tree trunk. And then someone else will touch the side of the elephant and say, this is a house, because it feels like a big wall thing. But it's an elephant. They all have their own limited view, and none of them are experiencing the whole of the elephant. When I previously lived in Massachusetts, there was a house along the side of a road that I frequently drove down. And one side of the house was one color. I believe it was yellow. And the other side of the house was red. And if you looked at that house from one side of the house and you said, what color is this house? You would say red. But if you looked at it from the other side and someone said, what color is this house? You would say yellow. And so we so often will take the view that's right in front of us and we'll see it as the whole view. We'll extrapolate and say this part is the whole. And so too, oftentimes, Reiki practitioners who say Reiki is a saturated market are looking at a very small aspect and extrapolating and saying, oh, because it looks to me like the market is saturated, that means that Reiki is a saturated market. And so I want to encourage us, second of all, to ask ourselves, is the market really saturated, or am I just challenged to market? And if the answer is probably yes, I'm just challenged to market, it's okay. None of us is amazing and excellent and incredible at marketing our Reiki business right away. It's something that takes time, it takes practice, and it's an ongoing experience. I know, of course, I'm learning all of the time about marketing. I know I'm always improving and getting better, and I know there's a heck of a lot more that I don't know than I do know. And so it is okay if you are challenged with marketing, because that's part of the experience, that's part of the process. But our personal challenges with marketing Reiki do not automatically mean that Reiki is a saturated market. Just like when one restaurant closes, no one says, oh, that restaurant closed because the restaurant industry is so saturated. Guaranteed, another restaurant will pop up in its place. And another, and another, and another, even in a small town that already has 10 restaurants. One more piece of encouragement. If you really and truly do find yourself in a saturated Reiki market, like for instance in Sedona, I'm assuming that Sedona has a saturated Reiki market. I honestly don't know that, but that's just my assumption. I'm extrapolating. But if we do find ourselves in that kind of market, it's all about differentiating ourselves from other practitioners. So doing things a little bit differently, doing things in a unique way, offering services in a unique way. Yes, maybe adding something to Reiki, to the Reiki sessions or to your services, add new modalities, but you don't have to do that. Reiki is enough by itself. Even in a saturated Reiki market, it's all about the angle that you take and the way that you approach it and the way that you differentiate yourself in that market. And so in Sedona, if there are so many Reiki practitioners and you want to start a Reiki business and you're like, oh, the market is so saturated, be different. Be different and claim and own your uniqueness, whatever that is. Because even in a town of a few thousand people with 10 restaurants, if you want to open a restaurant, do they have an Indian restaurant? Do they have a Thai restaurant? Do they have a heavy metal restaurant? Hey, I don't know, maybe you want to have the restaurant where they play heavy metal music. Or maybe you want to have the restaurant where all of the servers wear pink tutus and maybe play heavy metal at the same time. I don't know. That's kind of unique. I bet your town doesn't have a restaurant like that. The town of a few thousand people that already has 10 restaurants probably doesn't have the heavy metal tutu restaurant. And so this is how we can approach when indeed our market is saturated and the Reiki market is in our area saturated, approaching it in a different kind of way and showing your uniqueness is going to help in that kind of market. So of course, as always, no matter where you are in your Reiki business, in person, in Sedona, in central Nebraska, online, wherever you may be, please do feel free to grab the free Reiki Biz Kit at standingstoneshealing.com/Reiki Biz Kit. Please feel free to join us in the Reiki Business Collective. Do you think Reiki is saturated? Tell us about it in the Reiki Business Collective Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Reiki Biz. Sending so many blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Thanks for tuning in to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, and send to a friend. Learn more about the Build Your Reiki Business program at standingstoneshealing.com/build. Sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business.